Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Colours of Parenthood. I'm your host, Margarita, and today we're shifting gears towards a topic that's less often talked about, but equally important: lead fathers. Today we're privileged to have someone who not only embraces this role, but also champions it to break those societal norms. Meet Paul Sullivan, from New York Times journalist and the proud founder of the Company of Dads. Hello, everyone. This is the Colors of Parenthood, and today we have Paul with us. Paul, could you please share a bit about yourself and your journey into fatherhood?
Sure. I'm Paul Sullivan, former New York Times columnist and founder of the Company of Dads. Company of Dads is a media company, community platform, and workplace educator aimed at lead dads. And we define lead dads as the go-to parent, whether he works full-time, part-time, or devotes all of his time to his family, but in many cases is there to support his wife or partner at home and is always an ally of working moms and caregivers in the office. And I came to start the Company of Dads back in February of 22 after a great career as a journalist, something that sort of came to me during COVID. I'm a longtime lead dad, started being a lead dad in 2013 while I was, shortly after my first book came out, while I was writing a column for the Times. And it was really COVID that made me realize that a more formalized community and particularly workplace educator was needed for this group of people.
Hey, great. So when did you start the Company of Dads again?
Yeah, so I left the New York Times in October 21, and we started a couple months later in February of 2022. So as of this recording, we've been going a little bit over 2 years.
Great. And was there like a specific moment when you were like, okay, I need to start that? Like,
Yeah.
what inspired you specifically?
Yeah, COVID. I was sitting inside in COVID, and I was super busy as a journalist. But our three kids were sitting outside the if you're watching this on video, sitting outside the door of this office. My wife runs her own financial services firm, so she was incredibly busy, wondering what was going to happen. This is in March, April, May of 2020, the real onset of COVID. And I said, "Wow, being a lead dad, this isn't possible with my kids being home." The whole thing was really predicated on my kids being in school, or my kids being in summer camp, or my kids being home at a very planned time so I could plan my schedule around it. I'm an incredible planner. I live by my calendar, but it doesn't work when everything else kind of falls apart. And I was like, boy, this is really stressful. But the last thing I'm going to do is go to my wife, who's incredibly stressed out, trying to figure out what's going to happen with her company, and tell her this. There has to be some resource online for this. Like, how can there not be? And so I go to the Google, as everyone does, because the Google knows everything about all of us wherever we are in the world. And I was shocked. There's tons of stuff for moms, all the stuff for parents, really for moms. And the only things for dads were dads who were in some form of distress. They were divorced. They drank too much. They had bad relationships with their kids. They'd been incarcerated. It's all like super important, but not what I was trying to do. And so then the second thing I did was, I wonder, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there aren't that many men out there, or at least in the United States, who are lead dads. And so I did research the way I do research as a New York Times columnist. And I found out that there are actually an awful lot of men out there who were lead dads or could be lead dads. In the United States, there's 25 million men, and that's a third of all fathers. And that came from, super reliable sources: the U.S. Census, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Pew. And it was that I said, geez, this is a huge amount of men. And the step after that was to talk to senior female executives who had kids, because I was pretty sure men wouldn't be honest with me. I didn't walk around saying, Paul Sullivan, lead dad. I walked around saying, Paul Sullivan, New York Times columnist, author of XYZ book. And so I talked to senior female executives who had kids, and they pretty much fell into three buckets. There are women for whom their husbands had been super supportive, had the husbands had split the labor at home, done more of it, been super supportive of the careers, and they loved this idea. And they said, boy, I wish the term lead dad existed back then. My husband got made fun of by all of his friends. He was called Mr. Mom. He was called the house husband. This is awesome. Congrats. Okay, so that was validation. The second group were younger women who had husbands, and these women, their careers were doing really well. Maybe their careers were doing better than their husbands, but they were super stressed out. They were, still having to do all the stuff at home when they got there. Their husbands weren't really pitching in. They didn't feel like their husbands were super flexible when they'd have to travel. And they were, I wouldn't say they're borderline divorced, but they were definitely unhappy. And this is what a term I didn't know at the time, but a term that Eve Rodsky uses called mental load. They were still carrying all the mental load, and their husbands weren't carrying any of it. And they came back to me and said, "Look, I love this guy, but if he doesn't change, I don't know how much longer this can go on. How about you create a lead dad boot camp?" I thought, oh, that's kind of a clever idea. And then the third group was, look, I've been wildly successful. My husband was never supportive. He was super insecure around me being the higher earner, having the bigger career. We got divorced X number of years ago. I hope you can make this work for other people. And the conversation that brought it all together was with this woman who was doing marketing for GoDaddy, the company that you go to if you want to register a domain name. And she said, yeah, my husband's a lead dad. This is an awesome idea, but it's not a book. You're not going to sit for 2 years and write a book. This is a media company and a community platform. It was that conversation with that woman named Leila Brennan that really made everything click. And I say, she's right. There has to be media. There has to be community. That's the only way to get this word out there. But there has to be a workplace education component, because one of the things I'd done a lot with the books I wrote is I gave keynote talks. I gave keynote talks to companies. I gave keynote talks to, trade organizations. I gave keynote talks to, annual meetings. And I knew that most companies were really trying hard to do the right thing for their employees, but they struggled. And if they were struggling before COVID, when things were pretty well defined, like you show up at the office these hours and then you leave. If maybe you work from home on Friday, but nobody really thinks you're working. They think you're going to play tennis or golf or just screw around. I mean, nobody really believes that. And they were struggling to get things right then. Post-COVID, there's no way they're going to be able to figure it out. It just wasn't possible. When were they going to get people back in? What were their competitors going to do? And it's going to be a real disaster. Well, on the flip side, all of these parents, both men and women, had learned, there's long enough time period, 18 months, 24 months in some case, learn to live and work in a different way, which for many of them was a lot more enjoyable. And they weren't just going to leave that all behind and say, okay, I want to go back to what I was doing in 2019. And so that was really the impetus for it. And so, I told my editors at Times, they're super supportive. I wrote a final column in October of 21 telling people what I was going to go do. And then we've been off to the races ever since.
Great. And because you said so many times the term lead dad, could you please describe what it is exactly for our audience?
Yeah. Lead dad is the man who is the go-to parent, whether he works full-time, part-time, or devotes all of his time to his family. And in many cases, he's there to support his wife or partner at home, and is always an ally of working moms and caregivers in the office. And we use that term many because we know that 18% of lead dads in the United States are divorced, widowed, or otherwise single. So they are by definition lead dads at least half of the time.
Yeah. Okay. And after you created the company, were there many men coming really easily and saying, I needed that?
Yeah, that was the validation. And it started when that final column ran in the Times, whatever that was, 5 months before we launched the company, Dads. And, we've used the media component to really get the word out, to talk about the company of dads, to popularize this term lead dads. And it's both, men who identify as lead dads coming because they like the media, they like the podcast we're producing, they like reading the newsletter we send out every week. But it's also a lot of working moms who want their husbands to feel less alone. And they're reaching out and saying, hey, this is what my husband's doing. Please reach out to Bob or John or Jim. He's awesome. I couldn't do this without his support. But he feels kind of alone because his buddies are in more traditional relationships and they're less involved. So that's been the validation. And not a week goes by that some person who I've never met before in my life doesn't send me an email saying, hey, or send me a message on LinkedIn saying, hey, this is great. And so that's one of the things that keeps a lot of wind in our sails as we go forward.
That's amazing. I wanted to ask you also about your fatherhood journey. So you said you have 3 kids?
3 daughters, yeah.
Yeah. How old are they?
6, 11, and 14.
And before COVID, when you were a journalist and everything, did you feel also like that when with your first child, for instance, like the juggling between being a dad and having the plan to be a go-to parent in the
Oh,
beginning?
yeah. I mean, that's the story. I mean, my professional journey came out of my personal story. And, I was very much, my wife, we both did a lot, but I had more control over my time from the beginning. My wife works in financial services, and so she could get a call at 6 o'clock in the morning. She could get a call at 6 o'clock at night. She could get a call on vacation. I was fortunate in that stage of my career to be a columnist. So I wrote a weekly column. So occasionally somebody would call me up randomly and say, "Oh my goodness, Paul, we got to have you do X, Y, and Z," but very rarely. And as I said, I wrote books. Books take 2 years to write. I gave keynote talks. People call you 4, 5, 6 months in advance to give a talk. Even as I added more stuff to my plate, helping out editing some of the sections, or, doing other writing, it was all very planned out. And so I had, more control over my time, and that was key. And I'm like crazy, ridiculous, organized. But there were still moments where, at no point did I feel like I could wave my hand and say I'm a lead dad, because I was afraid of what people might have thought at work. What my editors might have thought, like, is he not committed to what he's doing? I didn't know what my friends would say around town. Like, what is this? Because it's seen as we're trying to change perceptions here at the company
Yeah.
does. We're trying to normalize things, but historically it's been seen as less masculine. Like, caregiving is seen as feminine, which is of course ridiculous, but that doesn't mean that a perception doesn't still exist. But I'll tell you this story. There were moments where it got, I'm fortunate to have a really good sense of humor, because I remember once I was in my car, sitting in the passenger seat of my car, because I couldn't type in the driver's seat of my car because the steering wheel would be in the way of my laptop. And I'm on the phone with a former White House cabinet official. And I've been trying to talk to this woman for quite some time, and we're talking. And I'm out in front of the ballet studio where one of my daughters is having dance lessons. But she doesn't know that. This is pre-Zoom. You just talk to people on the telephone. You don't need to see what they look like. And so we're talking away, and my dad has taken our other daughter. We had two at the time. We have three now. Taken my other daughter to the pediatrician, and I see my father calling. Now, my dad is great. We call him Grampy. Grampy's great. He takes the kids all around. But Grampy's not the person you want talking to the doctor, because Grampy's not going to remember it all. He's not going to remember it the right way. I want to talk. So now I've got the pediatrician's office calling me, and I have this former White House cabinet official on the phone with me. What am I going to do? And I don't feel like I can be honest with her and say, "Hold on, please, one moment. The pediatrician is calling." But nor can I lie to her, because I'm a New York Times columnist. You can't lie to people. So I'm like, what am I going to do when I do? It's like, okay. I said, midway through the conversation, I said, "You know what? That's an amazing point you just made. And it reminds me." And mid-sentence, I hang up the phone and I take the call from the pediatrician. Now, the former White House cabinet official is immediately calling me back, because nobody hangs up on her. People don't hang up on, senior government officials. They just don't do that. But I need to start talking to the pediatrician, figure out everything's fine. Now I've got to call her back, because she's now called me like 4 or 5 times in the course of my conversation with the pediatrician, because she doesn't know what has happened. Like, nobody has ever hung up on her. They haven't hung up on her in 15 years. And I was like, okay, I got to compose myself, and I got to be honest. So I get on the phone and say, "You know what? I'm really sorry that happened. The cell phone service in my town is horrible. Where were we?" And we picked up the conversation. As I say, the two things that I said were entirely correct. I was sorry it happened. And if you lived in my town in Connecticut, you would be appalled by the cell phone service. What I left out is that I hung up on her, because, but we continued on with the conversation. And one of the remarkable things that all the bad things about COVID, one of the remarkable things it did is that you could be honest now. Today, you could be honest and say, "I'm really sorry, but my daughter's calling me. Let me call you right back," or "Please hold 1 second." Or if, at some point, for people, anyone's watching this on video, at some point, one of my children, they're at school now, but if one of my children walked through that door and asked me something, nobody would care. I mean, there's this famous image of this guy, this analyst, I think he's in South Korea, became known as BBC Dad. And 6, 7 years ago, pre-COVID, he's doing an interview with the BBC, and his kids come into the room. And right behind him comes his wife, who's pulling these kids out as if they're like hungry tigers about to eat this man, when they're just kids who have come into the room. And he's famous as BBC Dad. And, it's a joke. But at the time, it went viral, because they couldn't believe, like, "Oh my, this man is talking to the BBC and children have come." If this happened today, it wouldn't even be a blip on the radar. Nobody would even care. And that's, slowly we're seeing, the change come about of how the, world of caregiving and parenting and work are intermeshed in a way they've never been before.
Yeah. I totally agree. And I would say, like, culturally, it's kind of like
there are a lot of differences, but is it's definitely still considered feminine if the man is the lead caregiver, or people would start thinking what happened to the family. That's what I see, at least in Bulgaria. I don't know, but I see it that way. And I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned your dad, have you seen like this type of parent role when you were a kid, or like you just it happened that you were the lead dad?
No, I didn't see this when I was a kid, but I don't really hold it against my father. I mean,
Yeah, of course.
cultural forces are really strong. You know, structural forces are really strong, and you know, I had a grandfather who I was very close to, but he was already retired at that point. You know, he was a retired. He worked in the post office. He retired, and retired the way people used to retire. Like didn't work anymore. Like and he had lots of time to sort of be with me and take me places. Whereas my mom and dad, um, they were at work, and I would come home in the afternoon and let myself into an empty house. You know, there was a phrase for this back then called latchkey kids. Like we'd let ourselves in because I don't know, I was in fifth grade maybe. So fifth grade in the United States, that mean I'd about be like 10 years old, 11 years old, because there wasn't another option. And, you know, my mom would work all kinds of crazy hours. She was a nurse. My dad, he had all kinds of different jobs, largely a salesman. And part of his job was to go out and have drinks, you know, after work. So, you know, he wouldn't come home until late. And it just was what it was. And so I just feel, and you know, you think of the generation before that, the World War II generation. So many of those men never even changed a diaper, never even gave a bottle to their child. And again, is it because they lacked love for their children, or is it because there were these structural forces and these cultural forces that made it seem not their role, something they couldn't do, less masculine? And so I think gradually, you know, we see all the data, each generation of fathers is more and more involved. But COVID really supercharged things. COVID really changed the way men could show up, and men who wanted to show up. And as I say, like, they're kind of like three cohorts of fathers that we look at. You know, the guys in their 20s and 30s and millennials, they wanted to work and live in a different way even before COVID. COVID just, you know, was an accelerant to that. Guys in their 40s and 50s, where I fit, COVID was a wake up call. Suddenly you could do all the things from your home that you were told you could only do in an office. And I tell the story that one of my middle daughter's best friends, both of her parents are oncologists, so they're cancer doctors, and the dad is actually leading some cutting edge studies on bile duct cancer. And he realized he was more productive running his labs a couple days a week from home, and he's continued to work remotely. And nobody else I know is trying to cure cancer. So when people say I can't go to the office, I have an important job, like, you are not trying to kill cancer. My friend Jim is trying to cure cancer, and he can take his kids to and from school 2 days a week. And then the third group is guys in their 60s and 70s, who really only get what we're doing if they have children in their 20s and 30s and seeing how they work and live differently, because their lived experience was so radically different than what people are doing today.
Yeah, I agree. And the one thing that you said in the beginning is your story, when what your mom and your dad were doing, is basically, I think, a really normal description of how a family works. Like for me, it was totally the same when, since I'm little, like it was like at home, it was empty, and I just went back from school in the house, and it is what it is. But here, fortunately, like in Eastern Europe mainly, we have a lot of like grandparents that are living next to the family, so they're helping a lot. And this is the thing that I see people in, for instance, in the UK or Switzerland, when I talk with moms, they always say like we're alone because they don't have this culture of living closely to the grandparents. Whereas here it's such a normal thing to have the grandparents really close, and they are helping a lot with getting the kid from school, going to, yeah, so it's really different.
It's different, but you know, you're in Sofia. I've been to Sofia. It's a really interesting, exciting city. If I was born in Sofia, I would probably stay in Sofia. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Western Massachusetts, and I couldn't wait to leave. And somewhat similar, you know, for my wife, her parents live nowhere near where she grew up, and so I get it. But like when you move away to sort of, you know, build your career, we both built our careers outside of in New York City. Unless you're from New York, you don't have that, you know, built in support system. And then in the United States, we just, parents struggle to pay for and to afford childcare. And 0 to 5 is big, but as I say, it's like kids still have a lot of parenting needs as they get older, and you don't really have anything in the States where, how do you get your kids to their afternoon activities? How do you get them, when they have a doctor's appointment, unless you have that type of resource to have a full-time nanny, but so few people have resources like that. So it becomes a struggle. And so many of us don't have, parents who are living nearby.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that, but definitely that makes a difference, especially what you've said about living in the capital. And you just said about the nanny, and I wanted to ask, you said not many people have the resources to have a nanny, because I've every person I speak to from the UK, usually the thing is like the mom has like 6 months of maternity leave, and then the dad has like 2 months, and then afterwards it's just London specifically, such a busy town, and everybody's working there. Everyone has a nanny, like everyone that I've talked with, and I think this is such a different thing as well from here. Like I've never known anyone that has a nanny.
Yeah, I mean, look, at one point, we had a nanny, but people who work in financial services and they're higher earners, they can, afford someone to, for paid caregiving. But the reality is, not a lot of people can do that. And what the other options are, you know, they're good, but they're still costly. I mean, we're very fortunate right now in that we have kind of a hybrid system of what you have in Sophia with your grandparents, and that my dad spends half the time, half every week, each week, half the time he is here with us. And so, with girls who are 6, 11, and 14, he's been remarkable with driving them to and from school, making dinner at night, driving them to and from their activities. And so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, when he's here, it's remarkable. But Monday and Tuesday, he's a retired guy. He's got to do his own stuff. Monday and Tuesday when he's not here, it's a real scramble, a real juggle for my wife and I to get everyone where they need to be, at the right time.
Um, I also wanted to go back to the fact that you said the societal expectations and stigma about being the lead dad. What would you do now if you had those two calls? Like, would you be honest?
Yeah, I mean Yeah, thanks for the question, but of course I would. We all have regrets of things, but if it wasn't for that call where I was juggling and felt like, what in the world am I going to do? I don't know if I would have. That was kind of to me in 2015, like the starting point for what would become the company of dads, but it took COVID to get things to a point where I was like, you know what? Not only is there a need for this organization and what we can do for individuals and for companies, but this is the time to be honest. Like when we don't tell the truth to ourselves, when we don't tell the truth to our colleagues, we actually make it more difficult for everyone. And by that, I mean, if you're not honest about what you're doing to work and care for the people that you love at home, you're causing other people to guess. And people are like, how does she do it all? How did he have that career? Some of the people I most admire in the 2 years since we started the company dads are both men and women who parent loudly. They make sure everybody knows that they're going to take their child to a doctor's appointment. They're going to a game. They're going because, their daughter or son had a bad day and they're going to go buy them an ice cream cone and walk with them for 45 minutes. It doesn't always have to be an event. It can be something where they want to lead as dads and moms. And that is good for them, good for their children, obviously, but it's even better for the corporate culture and for the company because now other people are saying, hey, wait a second, she's pretty senior and she's doing this. Or wait a second, he's really senior and he's my boss and he's doing that. If they can do that, I can do that too. And that's helping to change the culture within companies. And it's also backing up, as I say, you can have the greatest, leave policies, parental leave policies, PTO policies out there. They can be the greatest ever written down. But if you don't have managers who get behind them and managers who support those policies with, their own words and their own actions, they're going to fall flat. They're not going to be as robust as they should be. So when we get people out there who are parenting loudly, it's just super beneficial for the entire organization.
Yeah, I can understand that. And for those 2 years that the company has been running, have you seen a lot of like the increasing of being loudly parent in companies, like dads being really spoken, like outspoken about being a dad, and that they have to go to the ballet classes to get their daughter or something?
I mean, the people who come to me are always talking about that, but that's why they come to me to share their stories. So I don't want to uh, pretend like that's overly scientific. What I will say though, overall, like all the companies I talk to, some of them really, really get it and they understand it intuitively. And these are not companies that are, some of them are, well known, but not all of them are. And they see that this is a benefit to their employees. This is a way to back up, words with action. But they also see that this is a way to retain employees in a challenging employment market. And they do that because if employees feel like their employer really cares about them, that they're not just talking nonsense, that they really actually put some action behind it, they're more apt to stay in their role. They're more apt to stay at that company as opposed to those who feel like this is just a job. If somebody pays me 5% more, if somebody pays me 7% more, I'm leaving. I don't care. Like they don't care about me. I don't care about them. And so the smartest ones have really, wrapped their heads around it. And while on the flip side of that, some, global brands like Goldman Sachs, the investment bank, they haven't wrapped their head around it. I mean, they're bleeding top talent left and right. They're having senior female executives who are making millions and millions of dollars a year are leaving because they have options, they have other places to go, and they want to work in a different way, not in this rigid. You have to show up at the office 5 days a week, no matter what. That's a lot has changed in the 5 years, 4.5 years since COVID, and that's one of the biggest things that we've realized, that we want to be measured on our output, not on our time sitting at a desk.
Yeah. I just started thinking about, it's really interesting to like work in a startup or not in a governmental work, because you're flexible and basically you can only show the output. It's not because you're in the office and people are watching you and people are putting like protocols. You've been working 8 hours a day every week. It's more of like what you've done for the week, and it's more like also gratifying for the employer for sure. I wanted to ask, can you give me an example of a company that does not do that and is not like being flexible with their employees?
Well, yeah, I mean, just what I said, Goldman Sachs is the
Yeah.
example of this 5 days a week. But, I'd also add this. When you have, a lot of people like, well, this is for knowledge workers. These are for people who spend their days on computers and on telephones and having Zoom meetings. They can do this. But my cousin works for a manufacturing company in North Carolina, and they manufacture drywall. And so it's like a gypsum company. So drywall is, for listeners, if you're building a house, you see all the wooden beams go up, and then the drywall is what gets, nailed to the wooden beams. And then what do you put on the drywall? Then gets painted, or you put wallpaper on it. The drywall is a sort of, interior part of the house. And it's really labor intensive and it's really heavy. Like you have to have all kinds of manufacturing plants all over the place because you got to put it on a train. You can't put it on a truck. It's too heavy. And it's really old time, old school manufacturing job. And the person in family owned company, person owns a company, said, you know what, we need to give our workers in the factories some degree of flexibility that our workers, my cousin does, sort of IT for them, so he can be anywhere because he's the IT guy. And what they did is they moved to a 4-day week, and they just added 2 hours a day. So if you're working an 8-hour day, they then work 4 10-hour days instead of 5 8-hour days. They still put in the same number of hours. They're still producing the same amount of turning gypsum into drywall. And now they are so much happier because they have this extra day that they never had. And that's a day that they can use to be with their kids. They can use that to be with their spouse. They can go see their own parents. Or guess what? If they're single, they can just relax. They can go fishing. They can go play tennis. They can do whatever. They can go take a walk. They can read a book. And that's been a huge retention tool for that company. And it's also been life-changing for those employees because they're happy to work those slightly longer days, 4 days a week, knowing that what they get back is, a 3-day weekend. That's pretty remarkable.
Yep, that sounds amazing. I would love to have that as well. Now, a different question, but I'm curious. When you became a dad, have you ever felt this dad guilt that people talk about when you're not capable of nurturing your child the same way as mothers do because of biology mainly, but also because mothers have like longer maternity leave and you go back to work earlier, that you don't spend the time as much as you want to with your children?
No, I think because my wife has a very high pressure, high intensity job. So from the beginning, even when we had just the one daughter, we really traded off a lot. And I just love being a dad from the beginning. So no, I'm fortunate. I didn't have that at all. But that was kind of my mentality going into. Now, that is not the same thing as saying I was prepared to be a dad. I don't really think anybody is fully prepared because you do something and for the first week or two, you're not getting enough sleep. You're kind of crabby, but they're like, oh, well, anybody can live through a couple weeks of being sleepless. And then you realize that it goes on for years and you're like, I wasn't prepared for that part. I just would like to go to bed and get a full night's sleep. But no, I've loved it from the beginning and I've been very, very fortunate in that.
And did your parental leave was enough? And did you use it the 3 times you had your child?
It changed. And it changed because, to be honest, I think it was as much about me as it was about, where I was writing at the time. And so I think I took a couple weeks off for my first daughter, but then just kept working from home before people didn't work from home. My second daughter, I took a month off, and that was great but I also needed to be there for my older daughter. There's 3 years difference. And then the third time, I took another month off, but that was a really bad experience because my then editor tried to give away my column, which is sort of unheard of. Like a column at the New York Times is really associated with one person. It has a name and all that. And she was a mom. She was a single mom. And it was awful. And I guess fortunately, she ended up getting let go, not because of me, because I think she'd done kind of crummy stuff like this to a lot of people. But I really, I couldn't believe it. So it wasn't like some dad who'd never had any kids. It was a single mom who would know how hard the struggle was. And evidently, I guess she just didn't like me, but that was in whatever 2017, and so then I still went on to have another 4 years at the New York Times. So it wasn't like it impeded my career, but there was that moment where it's stressful. And we hear stories about this at the company dads all the time of people who go out on maternity or paternity leave and their job has changed. Their job is no longer existent when they get back. They get laid off in a mass layoff. So that's real. And I wish there was some sort of safeguards in place that if you go off on parental leave provided by your company, that your job will be there when you get back, because it takes what should be a really enjoyable moment in your life that you don't get too often and can make it really unnecessarily stressful.
Yeah, that is surprising. And have you ever felt discriminated by the fact, or have you ever seen someone being discriminated because he's a dad and not having the same, like, I'm gonna put it as an example. If a mom takes a maternity leave, no one would actually think about getting another person to get her role. Like, I know that this happens, but like if a dad does it in a company, then the company would be more prone to. Um, did you understand? Like the
Yeah, I mean,
discrimination
it happens all the time in companies where again, I'm talking to people at some of the better companies because they want to talk to me and share their stories, but it happens all the time, and it's not as overt as it is a little kind of understated, and it'll take the form of, "Are you really taking that time off? Are you gonna take all your time off? I didn't take all my time off. Or, I hope you enjoy your vacation." And that's one part that comes from the corporate level, and that's actually really easy to fix. And that's something we do at the company dads. You go in and do a training session with the managers, and you make them realize, well, these things that they're saying that they think may be funny are really hurtful and are screwing up the whole very expensive parental leave policy that the company created. That's a fixable problem, because it's like, don't say this, say that. Okay, so that's really binary. Where it becomes more difficult is in the sort of established like conduits to deliver information. And what do I mean by that? I mean moms groups, I mean playgrounds, I mean parks, I mean pediatricians or dentists or schools. The default is always mom to mom. And to break through that is really difficult. And so many guys I know who are lead dads, they don't feel comfortable going to the playground when they have young children. They don't feel comfortable because they're the only dad there. They don't want to be the creepy dad. But what they really are is just a parent. They're a parent who wants to bring their son or daughter to the playground so they can build relationships. And I jokingly say that the scariest place in America for a father is a playground filled with moms, because it's a really unwelcoming place. But I tell this story of this guy I know, Dr. Ramon. Dr. Ramon's wildly accomplished doctor. He went to Harvard Medical School. He's trained in 2 specialties. He's married to a man who is a psychologist. The 2 guys adopted, no, they did through surrogacy. They have twins. And they moved from New York to a town in Connecticut, and they went to the playground. Two dads, 2 boys. And this mom came up to Dr. Ramon, my friend, and said, I don't know how to ask this, but are you like the mom? And my friend said, no, I'm the dad, and he's the dad. Our kids have 2 dads. And the woman said, I'm really sorry. I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry. And it's like, oh my God. But we have this group, and it's the Facebook moms group for our town. And I wanted to know which one to put you on. And he said, well, I'm the dad. And the woman walked away because she was mortified because she said something really stupid. And he's telling me the story. And I was like, okay, Dr. Ramon, you went to Harvard Medical School. Getting into that Facebook moms group, it is easier to get into Harvard Medical School than it is for you as a dad to get into that Facebook moms group. I was like, I don't want to be in that Facebook moms group. That woman is horrible. I was like, I know she's horrible. She's very horrible. But that Facebook moms group is the keeper of all information in your town. Your kid wants to do a sport. Your kid wants to dance. Your kid needs a used pair of ice skates so they can go ice skating. He's like, oh, well, what do you say? Wait a second. So what do I do here? And I said, Dr. Ramon, you're a really smart guy. You're going to use something that I call guilt. And he laughs and he says, what do you mean? I said, you're going to go back to that woman, make her feel horrible for being so bigoted and saying this stupid thing to you. And then you're going to ask her to be in that group. And he's like, yeah. I said, yeah. Calls him back a couple days later. He's like, I did it, Paul. It worked. It did exactly what you told me to do. And now the name of the town, I won't say the name of the town. The name of the town is now called the town parents group. It's no longer the Facebook moms group. It's a Facebook. And that's the story I tell, because it's one story like that at a time. And one dad who came to me and we had this conversation. And now he and his husband have the access to information that they need to be fully involved parents. Because otherwise, if you keep this information just to moms, many working moms have lead dads in their lives, and these working moms have super busy, super complicated schedules, and now they're trying to keep track of when I'm supposed to go sign up for soccer or when I'm supposed to go sign up for the dance recital, when their husband is the one doing all that stuff. But he gets that information secondhand because there's no way they're going to let him into that group. So once we can break down those barriers, the barrier at work, as I said, is very fixable because there's a profit motive behind it. The barrier in the community is a lot more challenging because there are these entrenched social norms that the communications is only going to go mom to mom. So that's where we really have to work a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that the barriers that you just explained, and also the story was really nice. But yeah, I've never thought about it because maybe I'm a woman also, and I haven't thought about a lot of things. But we have a lot of Facebook groups, and it's only with mothers, and also in my group of friends, it's mainly the mom that knows the information. And as you said in the beginning, she's putting the mental load to know everything. And it's not every time the father's fault that he doesn't know what to do. It's because he doesn't have also the information directed to himself. It's because it's a second-handed. He doesn't. Yeah, and when the mom knows everything, she probably thinks also he should know that.
Right, but
When
he's not going to have the
actually,
access, and it becomes
yeah,
exhausting for her to do. Sometimes it's better, easier for her just to do it, but then resentment builds up. Like, why can't he just do it? Well, he can't do it because he doesn't have the firsthand information. You have to tell him, and so that's another layer within that task for him to then do it. And the problem is that what we're trying to change at the company dads is too many of the groups for dads are just about like telling silly dad jokes or let's go get a beer. I like dad jokes. I like beer, but there's something more to being a father than telling jokes and drinking beer.
yeah, definitely. Um, so as our time is coming to an end, I wanted to ask one last question. What would you say to a new dad that is actually struggling with the fact that he has to be the lead dad, but he feels embarrassed because he's not welcomed being the lead dad?
Yeah, I mean, you're not alone. Come to the company dads. We have monthly meetups. We have all kinds of resources. We have what we call the Lead Dad Library, and so it's a whole sort of resource library for men to get tips on very common parenting questions, but they're all written by dads for dads. But also the other thing I'd say is like being a father and being able to be present and being there with your son or daughter is just remarkable. And focus in on that, because that's joy, it's magic, it's a privilege to be a parent, and to at some point you got to drown out the noise, because those guys chirping in your ear calling you Mr. Mom or the house husband, at some point they're gonna be dads probably. And as I say, I've yet to meet anybody at the end of their life or on their deathbed who said, you know what, if I could have just gone through one more Excel document, if I could have just put one more PowerPoint presentation together, my life would be. No, they all say, I wish I could have spent more time with my family or with my friends. And so, short term, come to thecompanydads.com for help. Long term, know that, being a parent is just amazing.
Thank you, Paul. That was beautiful. Thank you for the whole conversation. It was really interesting, and I hope our audience likes it as well.
Thank you for having me on today. I really appreciate it. You asked great questions.